For almost 50 years, the federal government called the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Lower Manhattan one of the most secure jails in America. It held John Gotti. It held El Chapo for over 2 years, a man who had already escaped from 2 Mexican prisons, and it held him without incident. Then, on the morning of August 10th, 2019, the most closely watched inmate in the country was found hanging in a locked cell inside a special housing unit. 2 years later, the Justice Department emptied the entire building and sealed it. It has never reopened. And the reason isn't just that Jeffrey Epstein died there. It's what investigators found when they started pulling on that thread. Start with the morning itself, because the questions begin immediately. Around 6:30 a.m., 2 correctional officers doing breakfast rounds on the 9th floor found Epstein unresponsive in his cell, a strip of bedsheet around his neck. He was 36 days into pre-trial detention on federal sex trafficking charges. He was, on paper, in the most restrictive unit of the most secure federal jail in the country. A unit designed specifically so that nothing could happen to anyone inside it without staff knowing. He had been dead for hours. Nobody had checked on him all night. That single fact set off 4 separate federal investigations, and each one dug up something worse than the last.
We will get to the bottom of what happened, and there will be accountability.
The rules in the unit were not complicated. Officers were required to walk the tiers and lay eyes on every inmate every 30 minutes. There was even a paper trail for it, a check sheet for each tier with 13 entries per shift. The sheets from the 9th of August were filled out completely. Every round signed and logged. None of those rounds happened. The 2 officers on duty that night, Tova Knoll and Michael Thomas, were about 15 feet from Epstein's cell at a desk with a partial view of the unit. According to federal prosecutors, for roughly 8 hours, they browsed the internet, shopped for furniture and motorcycles, and for stretches of the night, slept. Then they signed paperwork swearing they had made their rounds. Both were working overtime that night. Knoll was in the middle of a double shift. That wasn't unusual at MCC. The jail was so short-staffed that officers were routinely forced into mandatory overtime, and non-custody employees, teachers, counselors were being pulled in to guard housing units. So the officers hadn't watched him. Fine. The cameras had. Except they hadn't. When the FBI went to pull the surveillance footage from the special housing unit, they discovered that of the 11 cameras covering the unit, 10 were not recording. The hard drives had failed, and they had failed weeks earlier. Nobody had fixed them. Nobody had even flagged it as urgent. The one working camera pointed at a common area from a high angle. It showed the stairs and the elevator leading to the tier where Epstein was housed. It did not show his cell door. Which means that for the highest profile federal detainee in America, on the night he died, there was no video of the one place that mattered. And here's where the story stops being about one bad night, because Epstein was not supposed to be alone in that cell in the first place. 2.5 weeks earlier, on July 23rd, he had been found on his cell floor with bruises and scrapes on his neck. Jail officials treated it as a suicide attempt and placed him on a suicide watch. Constant one-on-one observation. He stayed there for 31 hours. Then, psychology staff cleared him and moved him back to the special housing unit with one firm condition. He could not be housed alone. He had to have a cellmate at all times. On the afternoon of August 9th, his cellmate was transferred out of the facility. Staff knew Epstein was now alone. The psychology department's instruction was sitting right there in his file. No replacement was assigned. Hours later, he was dead. There's one more detail from those final days, and it only surfaced years later in the Inspector General's report. On August 8th, 2 days before his death, Epstein met with his lawyers and signed a new last will and testament. Jail officials had no idea. They found out after he died, like everyone else. Prison policy also limited inmates in that unit to 1 blanket, 1 sheet, 1 pillowcase. Epstein's cell held a pile of extra linens. A single genuine walkthrough of the tier would have found them. That's what he used. Attorney General William Barr, no soft touch on this, reviewed the evidence himself and described what happened as a perfect storm of screw-ups. The medical examiner ruled the death as suicide. The FBI found no evidence anyone else was involved, and the Inspector General, after a 4-year investigation, found nothing that contradicted that. But the same reports that closed the door on foul play threw open a much bigger one, because every failure they documented raised the same question. If this is how the flagship federal jail actually operated, what else was happening inside that building? The answer came fast. In November 2019, Knoll and Thomas were indicted for conspiracy and falsifying records. Both would eventually admit to faking the logs and walk away with deferred prosecution deals, 100 hours of community service, no jail time. The Inspector General identified 13 MCC employees with performance failures around Epstein's death and recommended charges against 4. Prosecutors declined to charge anyone beyond the 2 officers, including staff who had certified false inmate counts on the days surrounding the death. Then, in late February 2020, 6 months after Epstein died, the Bureau of Prisons received a tip that made everything before it look almost quaint. A loaded gun had been smuggled into MCC. The jail went into total lockdown. For 8 days, SWAT teams tore the building apart, cell by cell. Inmates were strip searched, cut off from their lawyers, fed frozen sandwiches, and the sweep kept producing contraband. Cell phones, narcotics, homemade weapons. On March 5th, in the housing unit, investigators finally found it. A loaded firearm inside a cell. Inside what was still officially described as one of the most secure jails in America. The working theory from the start was that an inmate couldn't have gotten a gun past the front entrance. A staff member could. A correctional officer named Greg McKenzie was later indicted, accused of using a prepaid phone to secretly communicate with the inmate whose former cell held the gun, and then lying to the FBI about it. By that summer, the Justice Department itself was quietly telling you what it thought of the building. When Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested in July 2020, the natural place to hold her was MCC. Her case was in Manhattan. The courthouse was across the street. Instead, the government sent her to the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. Officials made no secret of the reasoning. After what happened to Epstein, they were not putting her in that jail. In the summer of 2021, Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco, the number 2 official in the entire Justice Department, personally walked through MCC. What she saw on that tour has never been fully detailed publicly. What is known is what happened afterward. On August 26, 2021, the Justice Department announced it was closing the Metropolitan Correctional Center, at least temporarily, to deal with the building's problems. There were 233 inmates left inside, down from a normal population of more than 600. Within weeks, every one of them was gone, most transferred across the river to Brooklyn. By late October, the most famous federal jail in America held 0 prisoners. Temporarily was doing a lot of work in that announcement. In March 2022, inspectors returned to the empty building and classified it as being in critical disrepair. Electrical, plumbing, ventilation, security systems, all needing major renovations. Congress had funded barely a quarter of what the Bureau of Prisons said it needed for repairs system-wide that year, and the Inspector General put the real backlog across all federal prisons at close to $2 billion. MCC wasn't near the front of that line. No repair contract, no timeline, no reopening date ever announced. By 2023, the building had drifted so far off the government's priority list that New York City floated using the empty jail to house migrants. That June, the Inspector General released his full report on Epstein's death, more than 100 pages of negligence, falsified records, dead cameras, and ignored suicide protocols. His conclusion cut both ways. No foul play, but failures so complete that they had, in his words, deprived Epstein's victims of their day in court and given the public every reason to doubt the official account. That doubt never went away. In 2025, the FBI released footage from the one working camera, meant to prove no one entered the tier that night. Analysts spotted a missing minute, blamed on a nightly system reset, and noted the angle never actually captured Epstein's cell door. Months later, under a new disclosure law, the department released hundreds more hours of MCC surveillance. The internal emails attached to it confirmed what the Inspector General had already found. 10 of the 11 cameras in that unit had never been recording at all. No amount of footage could resolve a night the building's own equipment had failed to record. So why was MCC Manhattan really shut down? The official answer is deferred maintenance. And that answer is true. The building genuinely was falling apart. But federal jails had been falling apart for decades without the Deputy Attorney General personally touring them and ordering them emptied within weeks. What Epstein's death did was make MCC's dysfunction undeniable and public. One revelation at a time. Guards asleep and shopping online, logs signed for rounds that never happened, suicide protocols ignored, camera systems dead for weeks, a loaded gun inside a housing unit, an officer indicted for helping cover its trail. Each new investigation made the jail's reputation less survivable, until closing it became easier than defending it. Today, the 12-story tower still stands at 150 Park Row, directly behind the federal courthouse where Epstein was supposed to face trial, and where Maxwell was convicted instead. The pre-trial detainees who would have filled it now go to Brooklyn, to a facility with its own well-documented record of violence and failures. Nearly 5 years after the last inmate walked out, there's still no reopening date. The jail that held Gotti and El Chapo, the one billed as the most secure in America, ended up defeated by its own paperwork, its own cameras, and its own empty hallways on a single August night. And the government has never let anyone back inside.